Welcome everyone and good morning. Thank you for joining us on today's very special overview and release webinar for the CVRP Guide to Fleet Electrification. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes and let some people get settled in, and then we'll kick off the webinar. For those of you who are just joining, welcome and good morning. Thank you for joining us on today's very special overview and release webinar for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project's Guide to Fleet Electrification. We're just going to wait one more minute, let some people get settled in, and then we'll kick off the webinar. All right. Welcome everyone and good morning again. Thank you for joining us on today's very special overview and release webinar of the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project's Guide to Fleet Electrification. The goal of today's webinar is to provide you an overview of the contents of our new guide and help paint a picture of why each section we've covered is important to your transition to EVs. So a couple housekeeping items first. All of us are working from home and dialing in to present, so we'd like to apologize in advance for any audio or technological difficulties faced today. We've also placed everyone on listen-only mode. Please feel free to leave any questions in the questions box, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and we will distribute it to all the attendees afterwards. Next slide. And now I'd like to introduce our panel for the day. My name is Tim Insalvis, Senior Project Coordinator for the Dealership and Fleet Incentive Programs here at the Center for Sustainable Energy. Next up is CSE's newest and most seasoned fleet expert, Rick T. Bay. He joins us from the LA County, where he was the Chief of Fleet Management for the Department of Public Works. Next, we have CJ Noble. He is a Dealership and Fleet Outreach Coordinator supporting Northern California, and he will be covering our policy and mandates section of the guide. Last but not least, we have Bridget Tai. She is also a Dealership and Fleet Outreach Coordinator supporting the LA Inland Empire region, and she will be covering our marketing and promotion section of the guide. So next slide. So before I jump into why we created this guide, if this is your first time joining a CVRP webinar, the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, or CVRP, is administered by the Center for Sustainable Energy and funded by the California Air Resources Board. CVRP offers up to $7,000 for the purchase or lease of clean vehicles for both consumers and fleets, depending on the vehicle type and the household income for consumers, but for fleets, your location will determine your rebate amount, which I will cover later in the webinar. If you are interested in a personal EV or plug-in hybrid, I highly suggest you check out cleanvehiclerebate.org to learn more about the eligibility requirements of the program. We also have tons of tools and resources to help yourself, your community members, and your employees learn about the benefits of EVs and all the incentives available in your region. So why did we create this specific guide for fleets? We've noticed a very large need for assistance as it comes to fleet transitioning to EVs. As many of you know, there are several things to consider when electrifying, so we wanted to help fill this gap, break down the barriers, and provide a holistic go-to resource for managers to successfully transition to EVs in a cost-effective manner. Our hopes are that this guide will help you build a business case for the decision makers in your organization and help point you in the right direction for a long-term successful transition to this clean, cost-effective solution. This guide was created by our expert team here at CSC. This includes a handful of experienced experts in the field of EVs, EVI, DER, and clean energy policy. A big shout out to the team members who contributed to making this awesome resource. Next slide. So who is this guide for? We've created it for fleet, facility, energy, and sustainability managers alike of all levels for light duty fleets in California. While it does focus on light duty fleets, a lot of the concepts are applicable to medium and heavy duty fleets, and we do point to some good resources for those medium and heavy duty fleets as well. And next slide, I think we're going to hop into a poll here. So what type of fleet entity are you representing? Public agency, private fleet, equipment supplier or installer, consultant, or utility? Just give everyone a couple minutes to answer the poll. Great, and here are the results. So 52% of you guys are from public agencies, which is awesome because the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project offers a much greater incentive to those entities for fleets. So stick around and we'll go over those incentives in a bit. So next slide, I'd like to invite Rick T. Bay. He's going to give us some opening remarks. Rick T. Bay joins us with over 45 years of experience in the fleet world. He is a wealth of knowledge as he was the Chief of Fleet Management for the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works. He oversaw deployment and operation of the county's 300 plus level 2 EVSEs at more than 50 sites throughout the county. He's developed specifications for the county's EVSE infrastructure. He's also implements numerous SoCal Edison charge ready sites. And he's applied for and managed numerous grants. Now I'll pass it over to Rick for some opening remarks to help frame why this guide is so important to a successful transition to EVs. Take it away, Rick.
Thanks, Tim. So good morning and welcome. I've been in EVs since the late 90s with the EV1s and the RAV4s. And we put in the county, we put in infrastructure at more than a dozen sites. And we resurrected that for the early generation back in 2010, 2011. And then we built on that in the years that followed. Probably the biggest opportunity was the SoCal Edison Charge Ready, the pilot programs, and the county was heavily involved in that. We built this as we were learning as we built this, and this guide is really lessons learned, and it's really the opportunity for fleet managers, particularly public fleet managers, to get a handle on what will be a huge transformation in your operation. Over the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to see a wave of replacement vehicles. They're all going to be electric, and you're going to be dealing with this. So this is really the great opening to building on what's been done, learning lessons learned, and starting at a much higher level.
Right on, thanks, Rick. So we want to hop into our next poll and really figure out in the audience, what areas are you struggling with most as it comes to electrification? Are you dealing with which vehicles to replace with the EVs? Are you struggling with the infrastructure side or EVI? Are you having trouble leveraging the savings offered for fleets? Or do you know about all the incentives or rebates? Or are you struggling finding a central resource? And do you know, are you struggling with promoting EVs to your organization and community at large? Give you guys a minute to answer that poll. Oops, it looks like we might have got a little technical difficulty on the poll. Let's see if we can restart it. If not, no worries. All right, looks like we can't restart it, but no worries. Just so you guys know, we do address all these issues within the guide. And we, Rick and myself, are here as fleet experts and consultants to you guys. So if you guys have any issues with anything with your fleet electrification, please do not hesitate to reach out. Our email information will be at the last slide of this webinar. All right, let's head to the next slide. All right, topics covered. So now I'm going to quickly cover the agenda and the multiple sections of the guide. We will quickly dive into each section and determine why it's important to a successful fleet. And then we'll look to Rick for some further insight and recommendations. Lastly, as I mentioned, after we cover the sections of the guide, we'll go through a Q&A. So without further delay, here are the main topics. We're going to be covering EV terms and concepts, the benefits of electrifying your fleet, assessing your current fleet, electric vehicle infrastructure and chargers, considering distributed energy resources and impacts. Next slide. We'll also be covering procurement planning and goal setting, savings found from reduced total operating cost, utilizing CVRP fleet incentive programs, fleet management, staff training and education, and promoting your new fleet. All right, so let's hop right in. This is the first section of the guide, benefits of electrifying your fleet. So we created this first section to help highlight why building an electrified green fleet is a great opportunity for your organization. This chapter will also help you to build your business case to your decision makers. So now I'll pass it over to CJ to cover this section in more detail. CJ, take it away.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Tim. So if you or your stakeholders aren't already convinced about the dozens of benefits of electrifying your fleet, the best place that you can start with this guide, like Tim said, is right here at the beginning. California has set the goal of reducing GHG emissions statewide to 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. The transportation sector, and in particular cars and buses, is the largest single source of pollution statewide, with almost 38% of California's total smog and 36% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from motor vehicles. If petroleum refineries are included in that, that percentage increases to almost 45% of the state's GHGs. Transportation has an even greater impact on air quality, with trucks and buses accounting for over 75% of particulate emissions within the state. Those particulate emissions are most easily recognized as things like soot and are a mixture of solid particles and liquid droplets linked to asthma and heart attacks. By transitioning your fleet to cleaner vehicles, you are directly improving the future health and well-being of your community and the planet by eliminating your contribution to those pollutants. The guide provides visuals and statistical breakdowns that show the damage the transportation sector does to our and our planet's health and how electrifying your fleet can help change that. Additionally, this guide provides the simple formulas needed to easily assess and set the greenhouse gas reduction goals for your organization. For years, the state of California has been a leader in the charge to electrify the transportation sector. The CVRP Guide to Fleet Electrification traces that history of emission standards and vehicle mandates implemented over the years for both the public and private sector that your organization will have to take into consideration when electrifying your fleet. Next, the guide provides examples of laws passed that further refined California's sustainability goals and kept the ball rolling towards an electrified state. As an example, California Senator Skinner's 2017 bill, SB 498, requires the Department of General Services to ensure that at least 50% of light-duty vehicle purchases each fiscal year in California be zero-emission vehicles beginning in 2024. Finally, this guide jumps into examples of more stringent and localized mandates and how they may further affect your fleets. If the legal mandates, health risk reductions, and environmental benefits weren't enough for you, the guide provides a broad overview of the financial benefits associated with owning an EV as well. With the recent surge in adoptions, EVs are experiencing a gradual reduction in upfront costs, alongside a slew of additional local, state, and federal rebates and incentives. Not only does the guide provide a comprehensive list of these incentive programs, but it also details the savings accrued from lower maintenance costs and improved fuel resiliency. The big takeaway here is that we can't reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve public health, and save thousands of dollars if we continue to use internal combustion engine vehicles at the rate that we do. This guide will help you to build the business case needed to win over your stakeholders. I'll throw it back to you, Tim.
Thank you, CJ, for covering that first section. As you can see, there are plenty of benefits for electrifying your fleet. Not only lower total cost of ownership, but you're drastically improving the health and air quality of your community. So we really wanted to create this section to allow you to gather all these great benefits and the opportunity at hand with EVs, and that way you could build it and present it to your stakeholders and decision makers at your organization if they aren't already well versed on what needs to happen. So Rick, I'd like to bring you back up here. When it comes to the benefits of electrifying your fleet, what was the reasoning behind LA County's EV transition? You know, what benefits were they mainly interested in, and why did they make the transition so early?
So there are really a lot of good reasons for that. Primarily, it was the environmental impact. There are going to be people in any organization who have different motivations and different reasons, but ultimately it was environmental quality and meeting our greenhouse gas goals.
All right, thanks for that. I mean, you know, LA is pretty notorious for having a lot of smog and dirty air pollution. So it's good to see that LA County made some big moves earlier to make that transition to EVs. So our next section covers assessing your current fleet. So before jumping into an EV fleet and swapping out one ICE vehicle for one EV vehicle, it's important to first assess your current fleet size and utilization. As all fleet managers know, right sizing to optimize your fleet is essential for a successful fleet. In this section, we are focusing on collecting data to help set a baseline that will allow you to analyze your current drive and duty cycles, utilization rates, fuel burn, and greenhouse gas emissions. If you don't have telematics, we provide some good companies to look into. Or if telematics is out of your price range, we provide simple calculations to help you assess your current situation. This data will allow your team to set goals based on your desired greenhouse gas reduction or fuel burn reduction goals. These goals will help you figure out what vehicles you can begin replacing with an EV now, and what vehicles you can plan in the future, and other options to research for a diverse fleet portfolio. So Rick, I know you're a proponent of analyzing fuel burn. Can you tell us why fuel burn is such an important goal to set for your organization?
Thanks, Tim. So fuel burn is really what creates the GHGs. So whether it's gasoline or diesel, roughly every gallon of fuel produces 20 pounds of CO2, which is the primary greenhouse gas from an internal combustion engine. So if you look at analyzing the fuel burn, you can look at where the best application is for the vehicles. Vehicles travel in the county. The county is a very large place, 4,000 square miles, not as big as some others, but pretty good size. And so one of the questions is, does this have the range? Is this going to be suitable for the duty cycle? Looking at your fuel burn is a really good indication of which vehicles are ripe for replacement that an EV will be a good fit for.
Great tip. Thank you, Rick. So let's hop into our next section, electric vehicle infrastructure and chargers. So installing EVI seems to be one of the largest barriers to electrification due to its complexity and high costs. We've gone into great detail to help demystify this barrier with definitions, equipment, and project cost examples, site location assessments, and general steps and considerations for infrastructure build-out. Not only did we provide step-by-step considerations and detailed site location assessments to immensely help you save money on these projects, but we've also provided detailed information on how to offset your costs through incentives, the low carbon fuel standard, networked versus non-networked chargers, and assessing site locations and public charging opportunities. So Rick, question about EVI and chargers. There are some very important mandates coming down the line that we address in the guide. Are there any past mandates, regulations, or lessons learned that catch most new fleet managers off guard that you would like to warn our attendees about? Maybe such as ADA or trenching cost?
Yeah, so if you're talking about a fleet installations are really straightforward and really simple. If it's an assigned parking space, so I noticed that half the attendees are from public agencies. So if this is a department head or if this is a city manager, if that's clearly marked as an assigned space, ADA doesn't apply. If you have charging for your employees, if you have charging for the public, ADA applies. You must follow California guidelines from the state architect's office. And that can be really daunting. In some of the charge ready programs that we did, I put in applications for 20 sites, and one of the most common reasons for rejection of a site was it was an older site and there was no way to accommodate ADA in those work sites. So ADA is an important consideration. If you're looking at sites, you always want to think about where you want them. I can remember one facility where they insisted that the chargers be in this particular site, and the cost was going to be $500,000. Exactly. And if we moved them to an adjacent site that was slightly to the south, it was less than $150,000, and that was before all the rebates and the funding. So where you put them can make a lot of difference. First thing, I know one of the questions you're probably going to ask is, what's an important first step? And probably the first step you want to take is you want to get with your facility manager, and then you also want to get to know the account manager for your local utility. The account manager for your local utility is going to be your partner in this. They know where the power is. They know what the power requirements are going to be. You're going to be able to work this out, and you're really going to be able to map out where to put the infrastructure. It may mean shifting parking locations a little bit, but it's really a critical function. It's always cheaper to conduit along a wall than it is to trench and put it out in the middle of the South 40. So those are, and you can also think about things like underground trenching. So if you think about what cable companies do, that's another technique that can lower your costs. If you just, use labor and a backhoe and rip up a parking lot, that's disruptive and it's also expensive.
Yeah, those are some great tips, and wow, what a cost difference for that one site you were mentioning. And that's just mainly based on location and where it was.
They wanted it in the front of the building so that it was in front of God and everybody. And you had to bring the power across the property to make that work. It was really expensive.
Yeah, that's quite the cost difference. So, in this section of the guide, we really focus on these important questions that you should be asking yourself and your organization, who you should be connecting with to make sure that you place your chargers in a cost-efficient location that works for both your fleet, but also your pocketbook, right? So this section is very, very important, and we list out some very great detail of what you should be asking yourselves when you go into this section. So now we can talk about, procurement planning and goal setting. You've talked about what vehicles you're thinking about, where you're going to do chargers, you've connected with the right people. So, any truly successful project that is done with proper planning and fleet electrification should be taken very seriously. Planning properly will be the differentiating factor between successful and cost-efficient projects. We've used this section to further help you plan by helping you involve the right stakeholders, set the right goals, and ask the right questions. In this section, we also dive into your procurement schedule and the current tools available that can help you mathematically determine what vehicles and when you should purchase them. So Rick, we addressed some important questions in this section to help fleet and sustainability managers prepare appropriately. What would you say is the most important questions these managers should be asking themselves in their organization?
So I think the first thing you need to think about is you need to think about the long view. So think about where you're going to be in 5 years. Think about where you're going to be in 10 years. And whether you put in the charging infrastructure for that or not, you need to, at a minimum, put in the conduit and put in the panels that are adequately sized for future growth. We had sites where we resurrected one site at Public Works. We had 12 chargers there at one time in the early 2000s. When we resurrected that site within probably 4 years, we had 90 vehicles competing for those 12 chargers. So you want to build for the future, and we looked at 2 other projects at that site. One was going to add 48 for employees, and the second was going to add up to 20 for the public. And those were all, the base was going to be 8, and then the balance were going to be added as demand built. So those are the kind of things that you look at. How do you put this in a cost-effective manner? You also want to look at network versus non-network sites. If you're a fleet operation, that's going to be critical. You want to be able to delay charging. You'll find a couple of firms referenced in the guide. Most of the charging firms will have this, but you want to be able to take advantage of, we'll get to it later, but there's a thing called time of use rate. Gasoline is the same price all day long. It may go up month to month, but but electricity is very predictable. It has time of use rates. You don't want the vehicles come in at the peak of the day. It's typically anywhere from 3:30 to 6. That's the most expensive time to charge. You want to go ahead and plug them in and have them automatically start up after the rates drop. And because that's fuel cost is important. You also want to be able to claim your carbon credits, your low carbon fuel standard credits. And with a networked unit, you can do this. So
and that's actually a great segue, Rick. Our next session is considering distributed energy resources and the impacts that your new EV fleet will have. So most fleet managers considering EVs are concerned about the impacts these vehicles will have on their electricity bills, let alone if their current infrastructure will even be able to handle the load required for the new EV fleet. So we focus this section on techniques and technologies to help mitigate cost and real-time load issues. In this section, we cover the importance of connecting with your local utility and your facility manager first to assess your upcoming project and to discuss your current limitations and opportunities. Because of the costs associated with demand charges and the high cost of upgrading service, we offer a detailed explanation of load mitigation techniques and tools that will allow your organization to transition your fleet in an efficient manner. We also dive into on-site renewable energy and storage. While they do have higher upfront costs, larger organizations will realize a much quicker payback by utilizing LCFS, and it also adds very strong resiliency to your organizations during power safety shutoffs. So Rick, in this guide, we provide a couple companies that are helping to provide load mitigation solutions. How helpful are these tools?
They're more than helpful, they're critical. One agency who will remain nameless didn't have that kind of functionality, and in other words, the delayed time, and the cars were actually had were more expensive than to refuel than gasoline. So they quickly added that functionality. And you want to be able to do this so you don't have to have someone come in at 10 o'clock at night and plug in the cars. That's not efficient. So that's a huge thing. Solar, a lot of places are going solar at the same time, and you want to have an integrated project as opposed to something that isn't planned and thought out. That's a really low carbon fuel as well. You want to make sure that you're aware of the low carbon fuel credits. If you own operate the devices, you can claim those low carbon fuel credits. And those low carbon fuel credits are probably worth about 9 cents a kilowatt right now. So that's really in a medium heavy duty application, maybe as much as 20 to 30 cents a kilowatt. So it's really important. Battery storage is another thing to look at. Some of you may be familiar with the Tesla Powerwall. That's one firm that's in the business. The battery storage actually cushions the load. Another way to do this is with load management, which is available on some of the systems that are in the appendix. Load management basically, if you think about a volume switch, what it does is it moderates the amount of charge various vehicles, and it's really critical in terms of being able to charge every vehicle in the yard and really maximize your charging. And the final thing I'd say is you don't have to spend a lot of money on fleet chargers or on employee charging. You can use a pretty simple device with your system. The utilities, each of the investor-owned utilities have identified approved systems, and those approved systems do a couple of things. One is that they're able to dial back the charging during like a flex alert. And the second thing is that they have really strong backbones. They've been validated by the local utility, and they will give you the kind of functionality that we're discussing. You're on mute.
Thank you, Rick. Got to do that once during a video call here. So yet again, another important section of the guide is, considering the distributed energy resources and impacts. Obviously, solar allows you to get that clean energy fuel for free at some point once you pay it all back, but you'll be producing your own fuel on site, and the battery storage not only just adds to that and gives your organization the resiliency that you need, but if you can't afford all that, the load management technologies will be very helpful in mitigating the load and really help you do that efficiently in the meantime. So our next section is going to be savings found from reduced total operating costs. So with the quick advancement of adoption of EVs, the savings found with this clean and fun to drive technology are bound to increase and improve over time. Even now, fleets are already realizing instant benefits such as fuel savings, reduced service and maintenance costs, and not to mention all the incentives and rebates available at the moment. In this section, we highlight all the different cost savings found and the tools and resources made specifically to help further assess and build a business case for electrification for your organization's stakeholders. In addition to highlighting the great CVRP for Fleets program, we dive deep and list out a very strong list of incentive programs available that will be key to lowering your total operating costs. Hey, Rick, out of all the benefits and incentives, what are you most impressed by as far as cost savings go with EVs?
So I think the one thing everybody will notice right away is the reduced maintenance and the cost of on an annual basis. Your wear items are going to be cabin filter once a year, maybe wipers. you're simply, I've got 100,000 on my first Eevee, and the brakes are still north of 50%. So you're not going to have the wear items that you would traditionally have. You're not going to be doing the oil changes, the filter changes. And what that means is that the staff you have, you're going to be able, as people retire, you may you may hire people, but they're going to have a different skill set, and you're not going to have the same need for labor. You're not going to take the vehicles out of service while you're doing brakes. Your uptime will be much improved. So that's
All right.
probably the biggest piece.
That's awesome. Yeah, so reduced operation costs and maintenance cost. Lots of great benefits here for EVs.
Yeah, and the other side is you've got fuel cost savings. And if you use something that pushes it out of the expensive time of the day till later in the day, what you'll see is your cost per mile is going to be even less than a 50 or 60 mile per gallon hybrid. So
Right.
your
So
fuel cost really plummets.
yeah, so as we mentioned in that previous section, you really want to avoid those time of use rates and demand charges. So those techniques in that previous section really help you realize a lower fuel cost savings. So our next section, it wouldn't be a CVRP guide without mentioning the awesome CVRP for fleets programs that we have. So CVRP offers 3 different fleet programs. One for public entities offering 30 rebates annually, one for car sharing and rental fleets that can receive up to 20 rebates annually, and one program for every other type of fleet which are eligible for up to 1 rebate per lifetime. Like the consumer program, the vehicle has to be brand new, purchased or leased and operated in California. But last but not least, be on our list of eligible vehicles, which can be found at cleanvehiclerebate.org. Rebate amounts range from $1,000 to $4,500 depending on the type of vehicle, and all entities must apply within 3 months of the vehicle purchase. Public fleets get added benefits through CVRP as they typically operate in communities in the disadvantaged communities that they serve. In addition to being able to apply 3 months after they purchase, they can also reserve up to 18 months in advance to help with planning. Secondly, public fleets are eligible for an increased rebate. If their domicile location is within a DSC, which is determined by the CalEnviroscreen 3.0 tool, which can also be found on our website. So Rick, did CVRP help your organization pull the trigger on purchasing EVs?
Absolutely. So CVRP was absolutely critical. The county has of about 16,000 units. And the issue was 30 rebates were good, but in a year's time, it wasn't very much. But if you were a smaller organization, it really makes a difference in terms of making it competitive with a conventional fuel vehicle. And I think that's probably, so there are 2 issues. One is overcoming that first hurdle, the additional capital cost, and the second is the infrastructure. Once you get there, you're home free. And once people start to see the savings that rack up from that deployment, it becomes a much easier sell. So I would tell you that the CVRP were always factored in, and every fleet in the county was asked, did you apply for your credit?
Right on, thanks Rick. Yeah, it's such a great opportunity here with CVRP and the other incentives available for EVs. So we really want to stress, taking advantage of these incentives now while they're here. So next section is fleet management. Now that we've helped you procure the vehicles, it's very important to manage the vehicles, the chargers, and the drivers to help further optimize. In this section, we drive home the importance of fleet management techniques and telematic tools to best optimize your fleet. These tools will help with GHG tracking, incentive reporting, preventive maintenance, benchmarking, and etc. So Rick, any tips for the guide that you find very important for managing a fleet?
So I think, thanks, Tim. It's always critical that you be able to track your fleet. You want to be able to show why you did this, basically whether you're skeptical or whether you are, whether you've embraced it. The point is you want to be able to document what you're saying. You can't say it's no good or gee, it's wonderful. Politicians may say that, but in this business, you have to be able to show the numbers. You need to be able to do this. So you need to be able to show, for example, that your preventive maintenance, you've avoided the cost of oil, you've avoided the cost of an oil filter, you don't have waste disposal, you've reduced the time for the safety check from an hour or an hour and a half to maybe a half an hour, where you complete the safety check and push it out the door and it's good to go. And so fleet management and monitoring and having those reports is absolutely critical.
Right on. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, we also talk about, GPS tracking and route planning. So optimizing your routes for your fleets, training your drivers on, efficient driving habits. So another really good section of the guide here. So next section is staff training and education and promoting your new fleet. Now that you've realized the cost benefits, it's time to pass on that knowledge of benefits to your employees and community members to further enhance the well-being of your community. I have Bridget Tai with me to help address some of the tactics and benefits we've outlined in the guide. I'm going to let Bridget take it away here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Tim. Can you hear me all right? Hopefully. It's not work from home without a little technical difficulties. The Eevee Guide is a fantastic training resource to utilize when educating your team on Eevee technology, as well as good driving tips. It's important to remember that the time spent on educating your staff on the benefits of EVs and good driving habits will ultimately shorten your payback period, lower your maintenance cost, and extend your EV's life cycle. As you will see in the Eevee Guide, discusses the best practices relating to idling, aggressive acceleration, heavy braking, driving near empty, charging best practices, and how to engage your staff in transitioning to electric. In addition to engaging your staff in trainings, the Eevee Guide discusses the importance of promoting your electric fleet. Promoting your electrification program can be a very impactful step that will please stakeholders such as your board of directors or city council and give pride to everyone involved in the process. By taking the time to showcase your green fleet initiatives, your community will realize the significant indirect benefits, such as highlighting your commitment to tackling climate change issues and pollution within your community. Reducing criteria pollution that can directly impact the health of children and elderly of your community, and emphasizing practical measures to help clean the air and improve community health, sparking more interest in EVs in your community and accelerating clean vehicle adoption, as well as boosting employee morale and retention by building pride in their organization's proactiveness. Importantly, within the guide, we provide tactics and strategies to help promote your electrification fleet, and it's a great resource to utilize in both training and promoting what you have done. With that, back to you, Tim.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. And I would like to note that, CVRP has a very strong education and outreach team. So we have several teams that are here to help educate your organization and your community at large about the benefits of EVs, about the incentives that are available. So please reach out to us directly and we'd be happy to schedule something to educate your staff and your community about the benefits of EVs. So our next resource, our next section here are the resources or appendix section. We've gone into great detail about listing, a central resource here for all the tools and incentives available. So we have a very long list in our appendix, and you'll find everything from general EV resources and tools, EV incentives, and EVI incentives. And it looks like we are hopping into our Q&A. If there's any specific questions that anyone has about the guide or electrification in general, please feel free to drop it in the questions box there. And Rick, it looks like we have a question for you. Knowing that the latest wave of new EVs are coming next year, so we got a lot of trucks, a lot of SUVs coming, what tip would you give our fleet managers in the audience?
So probably the key tip is infrastructure takes a hell of a lot longer than getting the vehicles. You will order the vehicles, they will arrive on your lot, and if you don't have infrastructure, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So if you're thinking about trucks or SUVs that are going to be in the market next year, you need to be thinking, you need to be putting in infrastructure before you order those vehicles. It takes time. It's not simple. So the number one tip I would give you is start the infrastructure now. You're on mute.
Great tip. Thanks, Rick. So we have a question here. Is the guide available on your website as a download? So the guide isn't available to the public yet. Since you are an attendee of this webinar, you get a special treat and we'll be emailing it to you directly after the webinar. The guide will be live on our website on Thursday. So definitely look out for that. Feel free to share among your colleagues, but as a big thank you to attending this webinar, you guys get it first treat.
Tim, can I jump in for a second?
Most definitely.
One of the questions had to do with the SUVs and the pickup trucks that are coming. Those are going to be game changers. Public Works, for example, we had 154 sedans. We had 750 pickups, half-ton pickups. That was the bread and butter vehicle. When you start putting those vehicles in the fleet as electric and you get butts in the seat, you're going to see the adoption curve really skyrocket because that's what people are buying. In California, 70 to 80% of all the new cars sold are trucks and SUVs. So it's going to be a total game changer, and you really need to be prepared for that.
Most definitely. I'm personally excited for the EV pickups. I'm ready to take them off-roading and to the beach and up to the mountains and beyond. So definitely excited for the pickups and SUVs coming out. We have another question here from Israel. How do you deal with blackouts, rolling blackouts, and emergency blackouts? So as we mentioned in the, considering DER, your distributed energy resources and impacts, we go into great detail of utilizing on-site solar, on-site storage, or load mitigation techniques to really deal with these blackouts, rolling blackouts, and emergency blackouts. What it does is it provides your organization with a lot of resiliency. So if you have on-site storage and the grid goes down, you will be able to operate, your essential buildings off that on-site storage. And with the solar, you'll be pumping that in, throughout the day. Another cool thing that we mentioned in the guide is vehicle to grid, which is kind of an upcoming technology being piloted at the moment, but it allows you to use your vehicles and pump energy back into your buildings when one of these emergency situations happen. So just another added benefit of EVs there. Rick, you have anything to add?
I'm going to add to that. So I was in Santa Clara in '89 when Loma Prieta, and there was gasoline in the tank, there was diesel in the tank, but for most of Santa Clara County, there was no electricity to pump the fuel from the tank to the vehicles. I worked for Santa Clara at the time. We just finished upgrading our emergency gen sets. And so that was what provided the fuel. So the point is this, that regardless of the fuel type, whether it's gasoline or diesel or CNG or anything else, when you have an emergency situation, then you're going to be limited. The vehicles are coming with much larger batteries, just like our vehicles today. Most of us don't run around on empty. So we typically will have half to 50% or half to 75% of our fuel on a daily basis. We're not going to be, somewhere between empty and absolutely. And we need to remember that when we're talking about resilience, unless you're someplace like, God forbid, in Northern California, where the fire has just devastated everything and there's nothing left. And then it really doesn't matter, because there is no resiliency. You're basically starting over.
Yeah, very important, with our high fire seasons and just getting more and more frequent. It's very important to think about resiliency for your organization community. So I'm seeing a couple questions about medium duty and heavy duty. as I mentioned, this is a light duty guide, but we do point to some resources within the guide. So Rick, here's one. How do the challenges and benefits change when considering heavy duty electrification versus light duty electrification?
That's a great question. So light duty, my experience, has become pretty cookie cutter. It can be. It's much easier than it was a few years ago, and particularly doing it at scale. When you start moving into heavy duty, you're talking about significantly larger charge rates. And so there you really need to map out what your load is going to be. And so as an example, light duty vehicle is going to charge at about 7.2 kilowatts per hour. And if you have 40 of those, that's going to be certain one number. If you are talking about a half a dozen trucks that have 400 to 600 kW batteries, and you're now talking about charging those vehicles within a window of time, the charge for that particular vehicle may be 75 to 150 kW an hour, which is that is a really big number, and it gets big quickly. So heavy duties, medium and heavy duties are quite different. Light duty is probably going to pave the way. You're going to see some really incredible deployments within the next 2 years of Class 8 electric trucks that they're going to be pretty amazing. This isn't me. This is just telling you what's already in the pipeline. This is not blue sky. So, but when you look at the power needs, they're going to be radically different.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in the medium heavy duty space as well. And, Rick's very well versed in that as well. So feel free to reach out with him with any questions about that. So I have a question here. What is the typical cost of an Eevee food truck? I don't know off the top of my head. Rick, do you know?
My wife saw one several years ago. It looked like it was a little bigger than a rickshaw. And she found it someplace on the web and said, "Isn't this cool, honey?" And I mean, I can't tell you the cost of an Eevee food truck, but
yeah, there's a couple manufacturers that are working on it that I would definitely suggest looking into. You could also do an upfitting option, change out an old existing ICE truck and put an Eevee battery in there and electric motor. Matthew, I'd highly suggest you check out your local Clean Cities organization, coalition. They can help you find, alternative fuels for trucks, upfitters, and stuff like that. So I know San Diego CleanCities.org is a good resource. If you're in our region, we will help you point you in the right direction there. And I have a question from Lawrence here about the Eevee Arc. How do you feel about the Eevee Arc, Rick?
Eevee Arc is good where you don't have any power, or if you need to move it from place to place, or you're doing something, you've got an exhibit or a show, like let's say you're at Coachella and there's no infrastructure. But in terms of where you're looking at a mass deployment, like I was looking at 20 to 50 level 2s, it's much more cost effective to put in 20 level 2s on a per unit basis than it is to do 20 of those of the ARC. And in public agencies, it's always about justifying your expenses and being able to justify your costs. That's how you make the sale.
Yeah, the Eevee Arc is a really cool technology. I think it has its specific, use cases. But if you're looking for your cheapest route, that's quite not it. But definitely keep it in mind for those special locations where you need that kind of mobility.
So the other thing that I wanted to touch on, Tim, is in the guide, it speaks specifically about the cost range for equipment. And for EVSE, if you're talking public equipment, there are new regulations coming that are going to add a lot of cost to the existing public EVSE. And so those may be $4,000, $7,000 just for the EVSE. If you're talking about workplace for a light duty vehicle, and I'm going to include pickups, SUVs, or for employees, you don't have to go that elaborate, and you can get in for less than $2,000 for a level 2 for the hardware itself.
Yeah, great note there, Rick. Yeah, so we have a really good cost table that shows, equipment costs, average equipment cost, project installation costs. But we do want to, reiterate that there are some, extra costs coming down the line as far as mandates go for public charging. So just keep that in mind. So we have a question from Maddie. In response to DER mitigation EV costs, usually the best rate for solar is a non-demand rate, i.e. A6 in PG territory. However, these non-demand are not ideal to allow battery storage to peak shave. Do you have any examples where solar was combined with battery storage to economically reduce EV and building cost?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm sure I do, but I don't have one off the top of my head.
Yeah, apologies, Maddie. Feel free to reach out to us directly if you want to discuss that further. Michael, question from Michael. Does the guide cover battery depletion, high use years 4+ and seasonal energy usage? Rick, I don't think we go into a deep dive on battery depletion, but we do provide some techniques for drivers to, extend that life cycle of a battery. Not driving it past 10% or not charging it all the way to the maximum all the time. We also know that batteries, a lot of manufacturers are offering, battery warranties of, 9+ years at least. So there's some good things coming down the line. I know some companies or manufacturers are working on offering replacement batteries and then reusing those batteries for building applications. So some interesting things coming, but I'd say, battery depletion or batteries will last a lot longer than 4+ years there.
And the other thing to know is that for the electrics under state law, they're covered for, I believe it's 8 years and 125,000 miles.
There you go. At least 8 years. And all right, it looks like we're coming up at the end here and there aren't any more questions that I think I missed here. So I'd like to say thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We hope this guide helps provide you the resources you need for a successful transition to EVs. As mentioned, attendees will receive first access to the guide, and you should receive an email with the guide attached sometime after this webinar. I'd also suggest that you visit cleanvehiclerebate.org to learn more about CVRP, download program flyers, and watch past CVRP for Fleet's webinars. My email is on the slide, and so is Rick's. Please do not hesitate to reach out directly if we can assist you with your EV transition in any way. Thank you again, and have a great day.